The war had been someone else's problem for so long that humanity filed it next to myth and deep-sea monsters. Reports spoke of distant empires, triarch luminaries in their cities of sunglass, the Voral hive fleets like a black tide, and the Athari syndicates who wrote contracts with hooks for clauses. They traded, fought, and paused the way thunderstorms pause, only to gather again. None of it touched Earth, until 12 ghosted silhouettes slid over the rim of the moon and blocked out half the stars. Captain Maya Reed watched them bloom on the tactical wall of the UE's Resolute. They were ugly, practical wedges, scarred from 1,000 burns, each longer than a Manhattan block. "Designate unknown," said Harada at sensors. "Thermal profile suggests Voral manufacturing if they license to outsiders now." "They don't need a license to steal," Maya said. Her mouth was dry. "All ships form a line on Station Alpha. We hold." Earth had 8 ships she could call fleet if she said it fast. None carried plasma lances or light-sculpted shielding. We had rail coils big enough to launch a truck, armor born from asteroids and sun heat furnaces, nuclear engines that would shame a Saturn V in its prime, and something the galaxy kept misplacing: disobedience. The intruders opened fire first. Transparent spears of energy sluiced through space. Hard over 3 dropped the belly mass, Maya snapped. The Resolute corkscrewed, bleeding heat and plating. The inertial cages grabbed her bones in a cold fist. Around her 8 human ships peeled apart into a scatter that looked like panic and was not. The beams carved emptiness where humans used to be. "Return by vectors," she said. "No, forget that. Hunt." The Delphi dove sunward, skimming the gravity fog above the planet to sling itself sideways. The Nox climbed into the dark poleward and fell back knife first. The little frigate Iowa pretended to die and then didn't. Energy shields disliked blunt truths. Rail slugs spoke in truths. Tungsten arrows pushed to 1/3 of light, guided by nothing more mystical than math. The first alien wedge took 2 through the spine and came apart like a metal seed pod in wind. "Impossible," Harada whispered. Maya didn't answer. She was watching the edges of the enemy formation. Patterns lived there. The enemy flew like a choir, perfect, predictable, vulnerable to syncopation. "Target their center boss. Salvo 3 batteries. Prep an X-ray package for close," she said. "Captain," the XO protested, "we're inside our own blast if we miss." "Then don't miss." They didn't. 6 slugs stitched the flagship, not to kill but to peel. Cracks flowered. The Resolute knifed past, a silver beetle under a falling cathedral, and flicked a nuclear device like a coin into a fountain. The detonation came a heartbeat later, light punching light, a man-made sunrise tearing across the alien hull. The blast washed the Resolute, the armor howled. The crew lived. Half an hour after first contact, 11 of the 12 intruders were scrap and ember. The last drifted, bleeding atmosphere and spat out a pod the size of a delivery van. "Recover it," Maya said. "We don't have a brig for whatever that is," the XO said. "Then we'll use a conference room, put coffee in it, or diesel. I don't know what it drinks." The alien they pulled aboard was all lacquered chitin and mirrored eyes like 1,000 tiny stars trapped in oil. It unfolded 4 arms, bent low, and did not attack. Its translator crackled with the timbre of gravel poured into a glass. "I am Hegemon Adjunct Kex of the Voral. I am not deceased. This is irregular." "You attacked our home," Maya said. "Irregular meets consequences. Why?" Kex's mandibles ticked like a metronome. "Your planet was cataloged as pre-warp, industrially rich, defensively trivial. Our swarm requires metals and labor." "We already had the worst," Maya said, thinking of old wars when we were our own aliens. "We learned from it. Here is what will happen. We won't be slaves. You will go home and carry that sentence in your mouth until your leaders taste it." "You cannot fight the swarm," Kex said quietly. "We are number and tradition. Tradition loses to audacity more often than the history books admit. And numbers, we can count." They sent Kex back in the same pod patched and stocked because Americans are stubborn but not cruel. The Resolute limped to Luna Dock while the world below looked up with terror and a strange new pride. By morning the feeds had a name for the engagement. The door we refused to lock, and 8 ships had more volunteers than bunks. Maya stood under a strip of false sky in the dock tunnel while the med team picked composite splinters from her suit. Harada leaned beside her, hair singed where a cable had tried to make a point. "They'll return," he said. "Good," Maya answered, surprising herself with the calm in it. "Let them. We've practiced waiting our whole history. Now we'll practice answering." On the after-action loop, Maya slowed the footage to a crawl and taught her junior officers the lesson her grandparents learned the hard way. "Doctrine is a story you tell yourself about tomorrow," she said. "It saves lives right up until it kills. We didn't outgun them. We outlearned them faster. Distributed command, not one mind. Inertial suits to buy us seconds of maneuver others can't attempt. Projectiles that ignore the vanity of shields. Remember that. We win by refusing to fight the last war." Kex's escape pod was found 3 days later near the Heliopause by a Voral patrol. Whatever he said upon return raced through channels the rest of the galaxy pretended were not gossip. Word moved faster than physics when pride felt threatened. It arrived in 3 shapes. The first came as falling stars that shed no heat, triarch envoys descending like chandeliers turned upside down. They materialized inside a United Nations hall rebuilt overnight with more cameras than chairs. The senior envoy, a being of braided light whose edges hurt to see, addressed President Alvarez and 100 heads of state. "Children of Sol, we are the Triarch. We offer guardianship and the wisdom of 50 millennia. In exchange, our guns," muttered Admiral David Chen under his breath from the back row. "Our sovereignty and our kids in their uniforms." The envoy's voice rang without volume. "You overestimate the cost and underestimate the peril. Your victory was bracing. It was also anomalous. The Voral will return with ships large enough to carry cities in their bellies. You cannot scale ingenuity at that rate." Dr. Nia Hampton, xenologist, stepped forward, palms open. "Maybe not in your calculus, but your calculus seems to have one variable." She gestured to the feeds playing the battle from 8 human viewports at once, a chaos of angles and choices. "We don't do one mind." The second shape arrived before the applause died, a fleet of Ithari trade ships whose hulls were all curves and billboards. Their prince broker projected as a floating sea creature, every tentacle making punctuation the translator scrambled to catch. "Congratulations on your improbable defense," he said, grinning with too many teeth. "A young species with a knack for expensive surprises should never shop without a friend. We provide materials, finance packages, advisory services, preferred rates for preferred friends, of course, volume discounts, arbitration services. We can even lease you the courage to fight." Ambassador Reese flicked through a 1,000-page contract with an index like a cliff. "Clause 91 says any dispute is settled by an arbiter you appoint." "Impartial," the broker beamed. "Clause 91B lets you bankrupt us for contesting Clause 91. The third shape did not ask to land. The swarm sent a proof of concept. A single supercarrier whose shadow could eclipse a small country and whose first sentence was surrender. It floated at Neptune like an omen. And because Earth had learned its lesson about waiting, we didn't. Chen convened the first joint war college in Luna's carved-out basalt. Maya Reed, still limping from the suit's crush, spoke to cadets with the scabs not yet gone from her knuckles. "We won because we fought like citizens," she said. "Every captain a thinker, every sailor an owner of the problem. We are not unique in courage. We can be unique in how we allocate it." "What about diplomacy?" asked a young officer from Lagos Station. "If the Triarch supplies shields today, do we avoid the war tomorrow?" "Maybe we invite a different war," Maya said. "The kind where we forget who sets our terms." The cabinet split along familiar fault lines. Markets versus mandates, isolation versus entanglement. The best arguments cut both ways. That was the trouble with grown-up problems. Villains got replaced by trade-offs. So the committee did something untidy and therefore human. They said yes to science and no to control. Triarch scientists were welcome in our labs as equals, not overseers. Ithari could sell into an open market and buy at the same. Voral individuals who wanted to study without a choir in their heads would be granted asylum. No nation ceded its flag. No admiral surrendered their oath. There would be rules, but not a leash. Kex's name entered the record again when a small Voral craft, broadcasting an old distress code, drifted near Ceres. Inside was a single figure whose limbs had been bound not with rope but with ritual and shame. She clicked, stared, and then astonishingly spoke without waiting for a harmony cue. Designation shard among many, the translator rendered. I was born unable to carry the song. Your people call it defect. I call it privacy. I would like to work. Hampton almost cried. Work you shall, she said, and meant it. Earth's feeds called the policy naive, magnanimous, reckless, wise, as if these words were mutually exclusive. Maya watched the noise and remembered the envoy's warning. We could not scale ingenuity at that rate. Maybe not, but we could scale invitation. When the Triarch delegation returned to their ships, they did not look pleased. When the Ithari updated the contract, the penalties moved to smaller font. When the supercarrier at Neptune flared its engines and pivoted inward, Chen's message to the fleet was 4 words long and completely American. We'll do it live. The supercarrier at Neptune withdrew rather than risk getting humiliated by 12 ships and a planet full of people who refused to wait their turn. That fact taught the swarm something about optics. It taught us something else. Bullies test boundaries before they cross them, so we moved the boundary. Captain Marcus Osai took the UE's Indefatigable and vanished into the dark between Voral depots. Range? He asked. 40,000 clicks to convoy, said Alvarez at sensors. 30 cargo, 12 guards, they see us. Good, Osai said, all stop. The convoy slowed, puzzled. 12 escorts blossomed into textbook formation and advanced, weapons hot. Launch debris, Osai said. The Indefatigable belched a cloud of insignificant things, threaded bolts, broken panels, glittering dust, the leavings of a ship that had lived hard. On Voral scopes, it looked like garbage. On human scopes, each piece was tagged, vectored, and carried a human in a suit with a fusion biscuit strapped to their back. Lieutenant Ruth Park thumped onto alien hull. It's like ice climbing a tank, she said, and cut. Her plasma saw traced through chitin-plated alloy. Voral comms spiked, then tangled. A hive can sing one song perfectly or 6 out of tune badly. Engine rooms and nerve trunks, Osai said into the circuit. In and gone. We're not here for trophies. 12 escorts died like candles pinched by a wind. The cargo ships were not killed, they were opened. Supplies vented to the void, glittering rivers of grain and coil wire and stubborn metal spilling. Armies march on math. The math went missing. On the way out, Park's team opened a prison compartment because you do not walk past a locked door. Hundreds stared back, thin, blinking, every species in the Empire's index, all turned into hands. The suit's external mics caught the smallest sound, and the galactic word for please needed no translator. The feeds dubbed it the Broken Chain Campaign because people who write headlines like their metaphors neat. For 3 months raiders with Earth flags and flags, we had invented yesterday cut lines, scrambled comms, broke mandates into questions. Meanwhile, the labs on Luna became crowded. Triarch physicists whose elders called them rash sat beside welders who had been hired for their hands and taught themselves calculus at night. Shard among many learned to swear gently in 3 human languages, discovered a love for tea, and wrote a paper that began, "Assume the hive song is a network, not a soul." You can do that? Hampton asked. Shard clicked a laugh. A soul that cannot be examined is a mask. From that assumption came things that made administrators look up from budgets as if a bird had flown indoors. We did not copy Triarch shields so much as we gave them knees. We did not steal Ithari materials so much as we asked them to stretch, and they did. We took Voral comms and ran evolutionary algorithms through them until their preference for unison became a liability. The first test ship, UE's Concorde, came off the line with armor that flexed. coils that hummed sweeter, and a power plant that wasted less than our politicians. New ensigns reached for the manuals and found the pages mostly blank. Write it, their chiefs told them. If it works twice, that's doctrine. If it fails once, that's data. Either way, leave a note. The Voral response to humiliation at scale was predictable, they masked. The Triarch response was almost as predictable, they warned. The Athari started offering discounts on caskets and hull insurance. Chen looked at the star chart bleeding red where their rally points glowed and at the blue pins where our colonies had sprung like weeds. We had scattered by design the way prairie grass does against fire. Can we hold everything? Meyer asked. No, Chen said, so we won't try. We'll make them fight for the wrong things and pay for the right ones. At a memorial service for the 12, we didn't bring home from Broken Chain. An old teacher from Detroit named Angela Cole gave a eulogy that turned into curriculum. She held up a picture of her father, who had marched when marching meant dogs and water cannons. He told me once, she said, voice steady, that courage is a verb, not a feeling. You do it, then you feel it later. Our ships are verbs, our laws better be. Shard among many asked permission to speak after. The room hushed as a former drone stepped to a human lectern. In the choir, she said, there is no grief. The song keeps you from hearing yourself. I have learned that grief is also a verb. It makes a bridge between who has gone and who must go. I will carry it with you. The broken chain wasn't only torpedoes and boarding cuts. It was spreadsheets and solder fumes. In Luna Labs, Triarch field theorists, Ithari metallurgists, and a Voral dissident sat shoulder to shoulder with machinists from Ohio. When Shard proposed treating Hive traffic as a packet network instead of a holy chorus, our coders smiled the way climbers smile at a new route. Jammers became translators. Translators became levers. We didn't copy their best tricks. We combined everyone's second best until it behaved for us and misbehaved for them. Concorde Sea trials proved the point. The new composite flexed under stress instead of shattering. The capacitor banks bled power like a bowstring instead of a bucket. None of the parts were miracles. The miracle was how quickly crews learned to trust ideas that weren't born under their own flag. Every success carried a bill. 12 raiders didn't come home. Their names seeded community gardens from Manila to Marseille. Schools added a class called Civic Engineering that taught teenagers how to read a contract and a casualty report in the same sitting. Freedom without competence, the curriculum warned, curdles into spectacle. Voral mustered along 3 axes. Triarch envoys returned with softer smiles and harder terms. The Athari stopped joking about coffins. Chen's strategy brief fit on one slide. Don't be where they expect us. Don't defend what we can rebuild. Never abandon people. Our colonies, deliberately scattered, became both refuge and responsibility. When Chen finally signed preemptive defense everywhere, no one cheered. We just got to work. They came as promised, and then some, 3,000 Voral hulls bleeding into real space along vectors our analysts had labeled myth. Confirm civilian evacuations, Chen said on the flag bridge of UE's Union. Confirmed. All colonies at Go 7. Refuge corridors green. Then we start, she said, and keyed a line that cut across 100 capships and 1,000 small places that mattered more. Command authority is distributed. You know your neighborhoods, you know our promises. Remember why we fight, not to keep a map intact, but to keep people free. The Voral had learned something from Broken Chain. They brought redundancy, overlapping comms, reserve lines of supply. They had not learned the thing that mattered. We would refuse the fight they preferred. Plan unthinkable was 3 verbs: subtract, add, divide. Subtract mass from their spearheads with gravity mines. Add noise with decoys that made compassion costly. Divide the swarm into problems small enough for neighbors to solve. It wasn't pretty. It was ours. Maya Reed took a box of ships that had never flown together and made them family long enough to matter. We're going through them, she told her ops chief. Through. Union and Resolute and a dozen stubborn friends board a corridor through a sector picket with rail, fire, and short-burn missiles. then kicked lateral to shear along the ribs of the largest carrier. Inside, corridors went dark. On the seventh pass, a slug came through Union's aft and turned a compartment into confetti. "Decks 12 to 15 open to vacuum," damage control said. Chen did not pray. She wrote a new line of orders instead. "You have my authority to retreat if saving your crew means you can save someone tomorrow." The Voral sent their exemplar in answer, a ship so large it carried its own night. Osai took the Indefatigable up under its belly, and Park's team rode darts faster than plasma bloom, pinning a nest of resonance charges to the intake of its main reaction sinks. The exemplar convulsed, shedding fragments in glittering arcs. The cost ran in red along every status board. 3 destroyers lost, 4 more mauled. The choir tried a new song, Terror. They burned a mining moon and streamed the footage. "Answer," Meyer asked. "Answer," Chen said. Boats with holes limped into shepherd ranges. Medevac pods followed rails of light to field hospitals built in the shadows of orbitals that hadn't existed a month ago. It was logistics as ethics. By the third week, the battle had unwound into smaller wars. On the day the exemplar finally jumped, a 3-way call arrived in the Union's comms bay. Triarch Light, Ithari Grin, Voral Steel, offers, threats, prices. "You think we want your war," Maya told them. "We want our neighbors. The galaxy does not admit neutrality," the Triarch envoy said gently. Maya cut the link. Into that space, Shard among many spoke from Luna Labs, her voice routed across 1,000,000 kilometers and 3 species of hardware. "I asked a question aloud in places where the swarm does not allow questions." "What question?" Hampton asked. "Whether they have to sing," Shard said. "Not whether they can." A tremor ran through Voral formations not visible on any tactical plot. Some ships hesitated. We saw it in the timings, in the small stutters where obedience used to live. "We aren't done," Chen said to no one and everyone. "But we aren't alone either." Outside, wreckage and rescue lights shared the same sky. Inside, drafts of new treaties sat open beside letters to next of kin. Plan Unthinkable's last line became practice. Set watches, water gardens, teach the young why we choose what we defend. In Luna Labs, Shard used our mesh to whisper a new habit into Voral circuits. Pause before obeying. On scopes, we saw hesitation bloom like frost. Not peace yet, just the beginning of it. When Union took the hit that gutted decks 12 to 15, Chen's next order let damaged skippers disengage to save crews and return tomorrow. Survival was a tactic, not a sin. The exemplar's engines stuttered after Park's team seeded its intakes. A continent-sized machine remembered that stubborn humans keep getting underfoot. By the third week, fronts dissolved into local fights where judgment beat doctrine. The Triarch and Ithari called to reframe the chaos as commerce or clientage. Maya cut the link. In Luna Labs, Shard used our mesh to whisper a new habit into Voral circuits, pause before obeying. On scopes, we saw hesitation bloom like frost. Not peace yet, just the beginning of it. The Voral fleets did not disintegrate in firestorms or sudden mutiny. Empires rarely collapse in explosions, they wither through questions. Authority depends on obedience and obedience on silence, but silence was cracking. The first fracture was Shard among many. Once a loyal chorus leader in the Hive's vast navy, she had begun whispering messages into frequencies hidden between official broadcasts. Not commands, not orders, questions. "Do you remember the thoughts you had before the choir drowned them? If loyalty is natural, why must disobedience be punished? If the Hive is perfect, why does it tremble at questions?" At first, no one answered. The silence was a fortress. Then reports trickled in, barely noticeable but unmistakable. A gunner delayed a targeting solution by 5 seconds. A supply frigate drifted a fraction off its assigned vector. A captain rerouted his patrol without permission. To outsiders, mistakes; to the Hive, infections. Maya read the signals like a surgeon studies scans. She leaned over the scarred console of the Yui's Unity and said to Admiral Chen, They are not breaking, not yet, but they are wobbling, and hesitation is a resource. We can mine it. Chen frowned. How do you mine hesitation? By giving them somewhere safe to land when they fall. So humanity did something no strategist would advise. They built sanctuaries in the middle of a war. Colonies on Ceres, New Geneva, Titan's Rest, places barely fortified but open. Not just to refugees, but to defectors. Voral crews who cut their transponders and fled were not thrown into cages. They were invited to eat, to speak, to vote. The first Voral to mark a ballot did so in Nairobi Colony. She was trembling, 4 arms folded tight across her chest, compound eyes darting across the polling station. Translators hummed as she pressed her claw against a paper slip. The slip went into a box. She exhaled, whispering, "I have never chosen anything before." That image spread faster than any battle footage. Across colonies and starports, screens replayed the moment, a being bred for obedience, choosing freely. For those who had lived under mandates and decrees, the sight of voting was more terrifying and more inspiring than the sight of warships burning. Not everyone on Earth approved. Some senators called defectors a security threat. Soldiers who had lost friends to Voral drones spat at the idea of mercy. "They'll betray us," they muttered. "They'll kill us in our sleep." Chen stood before them and spoke without apology. "The alternative is to kill them all. If every hesitation is punished with death, we teach the lesson that hesitation equals suicide. I would rather teach the lesson that hesitation equals life." Weapons slowed enemies, but schools, books, and ethics lectures did something more. They converted them. Broadcasts from human universities slipped through firewalls. Philosophers wrote essays on sovereignty in alien tongues. Engineers posted open-source Starship code where Athari merchants once hoarded patents. The galaxy began whispering. Triarch elders muttered that humanity was dangerous not for their guns, but for their stories. Ithari guildmasters fumed that fair trade was an infection they could not outbid, and the Voral hive wailed in frequencies too low for human ears, realizing its monopoly on thought was leaking. Before vanishing into deep space on her own mission, Shard recorded one last message. It was brief, it was devastating. "The choir says we are voices without songs. Humanity taught us sometimes silence is a song. Listen." The message went viral in 1,000 tongues. For the first time, the hive could not silence its own heart. 6 months after Plan Unthinkable, humanity had 40 colonies, not clustered, not defensible in the traditional sense, but scattered like fireflies across the black. If one was destroyed, the others survived. If one faltered, the rest carried its light. On New Appalachia, human settlers carved homes into canyon walls and taught Voral defectors the patience of farming. On Port Saigon, Ithari traders, once masters of deception, learned that partnership did not always mean a trap. On Luna, human children kicked a ball alongside Triarch younglings whose skin flickered with auroras. "What if they betray us?" one senator demanded. Admiral Chen answered plainly, "Then we'll learn safety doesn't come from isolation, it comes from making neighbors." The debates were constant. Could slavers ever be allies? Did mercy dishonor the dead? Could cooperation dilute human culture? Arguments flared across colonies and council chambers. But unlike the hive, the arguments themselves were proof of health. Disagreement was not a fracture, it was life. Commodore Rodriguez led mixed fleets, not to conquer, but to liberate. Every convoy intercepted meant chains cut. Every labor ship cracked open meant drones freed. News feeds called it freedom economics, a campaign not of conquest but of subtraction, robbing the Voral hive of its labor through defection rather than destruction. What stunned the galaxy was not humanity's military improvisation, but their civic imagination. They didn't just teach aliens how to fight, they taught them how to organize. Ithari youths broke free from monopolistic guilds and built cooperatives. Triarch adolescents whispered about elections in energy forms. Voral defectors formed councils in refugee camps. Ideas spread like contagion, and once a being tasted self-rule, it was bitter to spit it out. To formalize the growing chaos, Chen convened the first interstellar assembly at Luna Base. The chamber had been designed for 4 species. It overflowed with 12. Translators crackled, tempers flared, voices rose. Yet at the end of the week, they produced something no one had ever imagined, the Charter of Mutual Aid. It was not a constitution, not an empire, not even a treaty, just a promise. No one left to starve. No one enslaved without resistance. President Alvarez signed it with a disposable pen. He looked at the cameras and said, "Documents don't save lives. People who believe in documents do. Let this one remind us." It was messy, it was fragile, it was unprecedented, which meant it was real. The old empires had always believed they were eternal. Their monuments reached into nebulae, their laws carved in stone and circuitry, their fleets stretching like chains across the stars. To the Triarch Emperor Luxar, the Athari trade princes, and the Voral war leaders, history was simply the repetition of control. One ruler replaced by another, but the structure never changing. Until humanity appeared. Not vast in numbers, not yet mighty in fleets, but armed with something more dangerous than any plasma cannon, the refusal to play by the old rules. On the crystalline throne world of the Triarch, Emperor Luxar gathered his council of viziers. Their wings flickered nervously in the chamber's light. The Emperor's voice was soft, but it cut like ice. "They unravel hierarchy itself," he said. "My young no longer bow with instinct. They ask why equals should not share rule. To question the latter is to invite its collapse. That collapse begins with Earth." In the dripping vaults of the Athari trade lords, the complaints were more desperate. Sex Mura, thick with golden rings of wealth, hissed before his peers. "Their markets reward honesty. Their contracts are transparent. Clients who once needed us now trade directly, trusting each other because humans taught them to. If honesty becomes profitable, then deceit becomes obsolete. And without deceit, we are nothing." Even to whisper such thoughts was dangerous, yet none contradicted him. Silence in Athari circles was never agreement. It was fear that the truth had already won. And in the shadowed chambers of Voral Prime, war leader Vector slammed his clawed fist on the command dais. Around him, hundreds of sub-leaders echoed the motion in hive chorus. "They dare infect our hive with individuality. Drones break formation because they hesitate. They hesitate because they think. This cannot continue. If the infection cannot be silenced, we will burn the hosts who carry it." So it was that 3 ancient powers who hated and distrusted each other for centuries chose the unthinkable. They allied, not out of friendship but out of fear. 500 ships from each power, 1,500 in total, massed at the borders of human space. Never in living memory had such a coalition formed. Its arrival blotted out the stars. The ultimatum was sent on every channel, every frequency, impossible to ignore. Triarch light, Athari tendrils, Voral mandibles, all speaking as one. Submit to joint administration. Dismantle your contagion or be erased. On the deck of the UE's Unity, Admiral Chen stood with Maya Reed, Admiral Rodriguez, and Shard among many, the Voral defector whose writings had spread like wildfire. Their faces were etched with tension, but their resolve was iron. The ultimatum played across every human colony, even into classrooms where children listened wide-eyed. This was not just a threat to armies. It was a threat to existence itself. Chen responded, her voice calm yet carrying the weight of centuries of struggle behind her. "You fear us not because we conquer, but because we refuse to. You fear us because our ideas move faster than your ships, through walls your weapons cannot breach. You fear us because your own young dare to dream as we do. And here is your lesson: you cannot kill ideas with warships." The alien leaders scoffed. Emperor Luxar sneered. Sex Mura whispered venom. Vector's mandibles clicked with hunger. "We can kill the mouths that spread them." Chen's eyes hardened. "Try, you'll find those mouths now speak in your own ranks." And as if the universe conspired to prove her right, the Unity's sensors lit up. New signatures appeared on the periphery, not hostile, not imperial, allied. Triarch dissidents who refused to crush their own children's questions. Athari reformers who longed for commerce without chains. Voral free choirs, once outcasts who had learned to sing their own songs. They came not as conquerors, but as volunteers. Their fleets swelled humanity's lines, not with perfect order, but with living, chaotic hope. For the first time in galactic history, the galaxy was no longer divided by species. It was divided by principle, control versus choice, chains versus voices, fear versus freedom. The battle was inevitable, but now everyone understood. It would not be fought merely for territory. It would be fought for the right to define the future. The clash at Orion's edge became legend before the first shot was even fired. 1,500 Imperial ships, disciplined and uniform, advanced like a tide of iron. Opposing them, 700 coalition vessels, smaller, less polished, drawn from defectors and volunteers, held position around the human fleet. To any strategist of the old order, the outcome seemed certain. But numbers had never told the whole story of humanity. The empires fought with perfect doctrine, rehearsed maneuvers, and rigid hierarchies. The coalition fought with chaos, with creativity, with trust that captains could make decisions without waiting for orders. Each ship was not a cog, but a voice. A Triarch cruiser shifted its shields to amplify the rail slugs of a human destroyer. A Voral squadron swarmed like wolves, coordinated not by a hive mind, but by shouted instinct. Ithari reformers kept coalition supply lines alive across impossible ranges, improvising markets out of scarcity. It was messy, it was unpredictable, but it was alive. The Imperial coalition struggled. Their fleets demanded obedience, yet obedience faltered when orders clashed with conscience. Crews hesitated, some refused to fire. Some sabotaged their own guns, and some, most shocking of all, defected mid-battle, their ships pivoting to join the coalition even as the fight raged. The war became not just external but internal. It was a civil war of the spirit played out in real time across the stars. For days, the fighting burned. Dozens of worlds watched as their skies lit with fire. When the final Imperial line shattered, it was not because their ships were weaker. It was because their will had fractured, fear had lost to hope. And yet when victory came, Chen gave no order to pursue. Instead, she transmitted across every channel. To those who still cling to control, leave. To those who wish to build something better, stay. Hundreds stayed. 3 years later, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The interstellar assembly was no longer a dream. It was a living institution, not a parliament of rulers, but a chorus of voices, not bound by conquest, but by consensus. Colonies thrived, each in their own way. Refugees became governors. Defectors became lawmakers. Former enemies raised children together under banners that bore no empires, only communities. At the heart of this new order stood Research Station Beacon, orbiting a neutron star. Built from human steel, Triarch crystal, Voral architecture, and Ithari trade ingenuity, it became both symbol and promise. Above its gates, carved in 100 scripts, read the words, "Our differences are our strength." Children of every species studied there. They learned not only history and science, but ethics. Why freedom without responsibility collapses. Why cooperation demands courage. Why power without restraint consumes itself. In classrooms where once only conquest was taught, now young voices asked questions their ancestors never dared. Captain Maya Reed, retired, lectured to cadets. Her words carried the same sharpness as in war, but now they cut for wisdom. Our war wasn't for territory, it was for the right to choose. Remember this, weapons can win battles, but only values win galaxies. And in the quiet after one assembly meeting, Admiral Chen stood on the Unity's bridge beside Rodriguez. He asked softly, "What do we do now?" Chen's gaze lingered on the stars, her voice steady. "Now we build something the galaxy has never seen before, a civilization by choice. And we make damn sure no empire, no hunger from beyond ever teaches us to forget it." The old order had shattered. What rose in its place was unprecedented. Not a galactic empire, not a federation of fear, but a chorus of voices, different, discordant, sometimes clashing, yet free. For the first time, the galaxy sang not because it was ordered to, but because it chose to.